Rome, August, 14 AD. An old man lies dying in a small room in Nola, a town he was not supposed to be in. He is 75 years old. He has ruled the known world for over 4 decades. In the final hours, according to the man who would later write the only continuous account of his life, he asks for a mirror, has his hair combed, and asks the friends around his bed one question. Had he played the farce of life well enough? Then he dies. Rome believes what it is told. A man's body, worn out, giving up on schedule. But there is a detail the histories cannot quite agree on. A grove of figs on a nearby estate. A tree the emperor was seen inspecting, admiring, days before he fell ill. And a wife, his third, his last, the only one who lasted, who some ancient writers say, never let him eat fruit she had not picked herself. The question is not whether Augustus died. The question is whether he was allowed to. To understand why this story survives only as rumor, you have to understand what Augustus and Livia actually built. In 27 BC, Rome had just finished tearing itself apart. A century of civil war. Marius against Sulla, Caesar against Pompey, Antony against Octavian, had left the Republic a corpse wearing its own clothes. Octavian, the last man standing, did something unprecedented. He kept the Senate, the magistracies, the language of the Republic, and quietly drained all of it of power. He became Augustus. Rome called it restoration. It was, in practice, the birth of one-man rule wearing a toga. Livia Drusilla was with him for nearly all of it. 52 years of marriage, from 38 BC until his death. She was not a background figure. Ancient sources across the political spectrum describe her as sharp, disciplined, and constantly, visibly present in the machinery of state. Augustus reportedly kept notes before difficult conversations with her, the way a man prepares for someone he cannot out-argue. Here is the stake at the center of this story. Augustus's own bloodline kept failing him. Nephews, grandsons, adopted heirs. One after another died young, in circumstances contemporaries found convenient rather than tragic. Every single time, the death cleared a path for one man, Livia's son from her first marriage, Tiberius. A man Augustus did not initially want as his heir, and got anyway. That is why this story matters, and why it was dangerous to tell even in antiquity. It is not a ghost story, it is a succession story. The oldest, most explosive genre in the history of power. And succession stories, when they touch a still-reigning dynasty, do not get written down. They get whispered, half-recorded by writers who know exactly how far they can go, and then left for later generations to either believe or dismiss. Start with the marriage itself, because it begins in a scandal that Rome mostly chose to forget. In 39 BC, Livia was already married, already pregnant with her second child, when Octavian, not yet Augustus, became infatuated with her and pressured her husband into divorcing her. Octavian himself was still married to Scribonia, whom he divorced, according to Suetonius, on the very day she bore him his only child, Julia. The new marriage to Livia was arranged with almost indecent haste. Rome noticed, Rome talked, and then, over the following decades, Rome mostly stopped talking, because Livia made herself extraordinarily difficult to attack. She cultivated the image of the ideal Roman matron. Modest dress, spun wool, unwavering loyalty, while simultaneously accumulating real influence few women of her era ever touched. She held property in her own name. She had her own clients and political networks. Cassius Dio records that Augustus consulted her on matters of state as a genuine partner, not a decoration. This dual image, domestic virtue on the surface, political steel underneath, is exactly the kind of figure ancient historians love to reinterpret as sinister once she started outliving people. And she outlived a remarkable number of people who stood between her son and the throne. Marcellus, Augustus's nephew and first intended heir, died in 23 BC at 20, of an illness during an epidemic. Plausible, unremarkable, except that it was the first of a pattern. Next came Agrippa's sons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar, grandsons whom Augustus had personally adopted and was grooming for power. Lucius died suddenly in Gaul in 2 AD. Gaius died in 4 AD, from a wound that had seemed to be healing, in Lycia, far from Rome. 2 heirs, both healthy young men, both dead within 2 years of each other, both clearing space for Livia's son. Tacitus is the writer who puts the accusation into words, and he does it with characteristic care, not as fact, but as report. Writing decades after the events, in the Annals, he records that suspicion fell on Livia for the deaths of Gaius and Lucius, and outright states that many believed Augustus's own death was hastened by his wife. smearing poison on figs still on the tree so that the emperor would pick and eat the ones she intended for him, while she avoided the ones she had left untouched. Tacitus does not present this as proven. He presents it as what people said, a distinction that matters enormously, and one his critics and defenders have argued over for 2,000 years since. There is one more death that belongs in this sequence, and it is the strangest. Agrippa Postumus, Augustus's last surviving grandson by blood, had been exiled to an island years earlier for erratic and violent behavior. Whether real or invented is itself disputed. The moment Augustus died, before Tiberius had even returned to Rome to be confirmed as emperor, a soldier arrived at that island and executed Postumus on the spot. Tacitus reports that when Tiberius was asked who gave the order, he denied it. The Senate did not investigate. Suetonius adds that some believed the order came not from Tiberius at all, but had been left as a standing instruction from Augustus himself, to be carried out the instant he died, which, if true, would mean the old emperor cleared the board for Tiberius's succession with his final breath, whether or not Livia had hastened that breath along. What you have by 14 AD is this. Every plausible alternative heir to Augustus is dead. Every death has an innocent medical or military explanation, and every single death benefits exactly one person's son. Ancient historians noticed the pattern too. They just couldn't prove it, and they knew that saying so plainly about the mother of the reigning emperor was not a survivable sentence to write. The suppression here did not require burning books or executing witnesses. It worked through something quieter and more durable. Control of the narrative while the story was still being written. Augustus was deified by the Senate within weeks of his death. Once a man is a god, accusing his wife of murdering him stops being political commentary and becomes something close to sacrilege. Tiberius, whose entire legitimacy rested on being adopted by that god and married into that bloodline, had every incentive to let the official story stand. Natural death, peaceful succession, a grieving widow. Livia herself lived another 15 years as the most powerful woman in Rome, styled Julia Augusta, controlling her own cult and her own account of events until 29 AD. No historian wrote critically about her while she held that kind of reach. The evidence that might have settled the question was never the kind that survives. There was no autopsy, there was no forensic record. Rome had no framework for one. What we have instead is testimony filtered through two later historians, Tacitus and Suetonius, writing roughly a century after the events, drawing on sources now lost to us, each with his own reasons to shade the record. Suetonius had access to imperial archives, but wrote under emperors who had their own relationship to the Julio-Claudian legacy. Tacitus wrote with an open hostility toward the entire imperial system, which means his willingness to report the poisoning rumor should be weighed against his broader project of showing that empire corrupts everyone it touches. So what survived is exactly the material that could survive. Hedged, attributed to rumor, never printed as fact, but never fully erased either. That hedge is not an accident. It is the maximum truth two historians could publish about a divine family without risking their own necks. And it is precisely specific enough, applied to precisely the right pattern of deaths, that dismissing it entirely requires ignoring how convenient every single one of those deaths turned out to be. Here is where this channel lands, and where it must stop. There is no surviving evidence that would convict Livia Drusilla in any court that requires proof. What exists is pattern, motive, opportunity, and the testimony of writers who were careful enough to survive telling it. That is not nothing. It is also not a verdict. What we can say with confidence is this. The succession of Augustus was not the peaceful, providential handover Roman propaganda insisted it was. Too many young, healthy men died at exactly the right moments for exactly the wrong reasons. Every dynasty writes its own founding myth. Somewhere underneath it is usually a woman, a poison, or a body that the official record simply declined to examine too closely.